In the most recent issue of Mr. A by Steve Ditko that just came today is a very timely essay called Violence, the Phony Issue. It's timely because trending online is a lot of debate as to what to do about that horrific school shooting in Florida and what policies we should put in place. So this essay is right on point, and I feel most people probably won't even be aware of it, and those who are, very few will even read it. But it has something interesting to say. So let's just look at the top. Violence, the phony issue. To serve justice, to protect the innocent, and identify the guilty, a man must know where to place the blame. And I'll just tell you from experience, having read a lot of Ditko, I know that when he says a man, he means people kind, mankind, humankind. In other videos, I've shown why that's the case. Here he writes, justice demands that man's principles be defined in terms of black and white, in good or evil. Men, by which he means people, can choose to be gray, to be corrupt, but there can be no gray, no corrupt principles. He is saying, I think, that the school shooter is evil, and it should not be sugar-coated in ambiguity. There have been some articles that seem to have done that, blaming his childhood, for instance. But the shooter's act was an evil act, and what Ditko would argue is that one makes the choice to either live a rational life, which means to have the values of respect for other people and their rights and freedoms, or an irrational life, which is a life of force. Now, Ditko observes that most of society is irrational. You have the tops of governments as being run by people who are irrational, and that's going to create policies and an environment and an atmosphere that essentially enables the irrational people, the irrational behavior of others. So let's just sum up what he says here. So the real issue is not about the degrees of force, violence, but does any person have the right to use force to make you or anyone else accept his will? If you say someone does, then don't cry about how much violence is being committed because you gave others the right to be violent. The mounting victims of violence are just the logical result of the tactics that have your approval. You promote and help keep the violent ones running wild over mankind. If you're opposed to violence, then the issue is initiation of force as right and moral. The solution is recognition and acceptance of the proper use of force and the condemnation of every improper use of force. There is only the good and the evil. Understand that you are now living in a world that chooses to compromise between them, in between right and might. And too many have chosen to accept violence and corruption as the best and only way to live. So what I would say is, while the issue here is correct, policy and change, it's also incorrect. I don't know about prayers, but I can definitely say thoughts are important. How one thinks is critical. And what Ditko is saying is, if people were to think rationally, if people at the top of our government and those in charge were to think rationally, then it would flow downwards, that the policies, the changes would be rational as well. But it also has to work bottom up. In other words, an understanding that there is right and there is wrong has to come from the people, and that will filter upwards. If one wants to live in a world where, for instance, Ditko says every person has a right to believe anything he wants to believe, but no person has a right to initiate force to make another person accept and act on the beliefs he chooses to reject. It doesn't matter if the beliefs are true or false. It's only the irrational beliefs that are harmful and that need force to have them accepted. In an atmosphere free of initiated force, the irrational could have no standing or power and could only harm those who freely choose to be irrational. The irrational could claim no innocent victims. Wrongdoers love to have the blame for their actions placed on someone else, on anything but themselves. With the issue of violence, it's popular to blame it on American history, society, environment, poverty, the dollar, TV networks, sponsors, police, magazines, art, etc., 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 etc. And you could just as easily blame it on yesterday afternoon, electricity, language, eyes, and ears. It's people who commit acts of violence, not objects in the environment. People who reject rationality. People choose to initiate force to get their way. So, in sum, Ditko is advocating not just changes in policies, he's advocating a change in the way people think. Bottom up, top down, and that view is centered in objectivism, which is a hot button issue because it's the philosophy of Ayn Rand, but Ditko puts it in a policy perspective that I think is worth thinking about. One can talk about it, one can disagree with it, but I believe it moves the debate further. And who would have thought that that could be possible with a comic book? So Steve Ditko's Mr. A, it just came out from Snyder and Ditko. Go to the Snyder and Ditko website and you can buy a copy.